Greetings to our viewers. Hello to all viewers of our channel. Today we will delve into one of the most fascinating mysteries of the Roman Empire, the history of the secret rituals of Dionysus. But before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and click the bell so you don't miss any new discoveries. Also, write in the comments, did you know about the existence of secret cults in ancient Rome? Your thoughts are very important to us. Chapter 1. The discovery I danced for Dionysus in the Forbidden Hall. They just unearthed our secret. The official gods of Rome offered only duty and cold marble. They never offered release. That's why I sought him, Dionysus. They called us conspirators. Our rites an abomination, but in that hidden hall, whose frescoes you now admire, we found divinity. I remember being led there, blindfolded. The scent of wine and damp earth filled my nostrils as we descended into the underground chamber. The hypnotic rhythm of the drum pulled you out of your own skin, transported you to a realm where mortal concerns dissolved like morning mist. The vibrant paintings on the walls seemed to move in the torchlight, to dance with us in eternal celebration. We weren't just drinking wine. We were communing with a god who understood chaos and ecstasy, who embraced the wild nature that Roman society demanded we suppress. In those sacred moments, beneath the earth where no senator or emperor could reach us, we found what our souls truly craved: freedom from the rigid structures that bound our daily lives. The authorities feared what they couldn't control. They spoke of moral decay, of threats to the Roman way of life. But they never understood that we weren't destroying Rome. We were saving our humanity within it. The cult of Dionysus offered something the state religion never could: genuine spiritual transformation, authentic connection to the divine, and release from the suffocating expectations of Roman citizenship. Now, 2,000 years later, you've found our sanctuary. You call it archaeology, cataloging our sacred frescoes as mere artifacts, analyzing our ritual vessels as historical curiosities. But for us, it was life itself. Every symbol on those walls, every cup we raised, every dance we performed was a declaration of our deepest beliefs about what it meant to be truly alive. The priestess who initiated me spoke of Dionysus as the god of contradictions, life and death, civilization and wildness, order and chaos. She taught me that true wisdom came from embracing these paradoxes rather than choosing sides. In a world that demanded absolute conformity, this was revolutionary thinking. I was not born into wealth or nobility. My family were merchants, respectable but unremarkable citizens of the empire. Yet in that hidden hall, social distinctions melted away. Senators danced beside slaves, patrician women shared wine with freedmen, and all were equal in the eyes of our God. This equality, this brotherhood of the spirit, was perhaps what the authorities feared most. The rituals themselves were carefully guarded secrets, passed down through generations of initiates. We learned the sacred words in Greek, the original language of our God's worship. We studied the myths that reveal deeper truths about human nature and divine purpose. We practiced the dances that would carry us into ecstatic communion with Dionysus himself. But it was more than ritual and ceremony. The cult provided a community of understanding in a world that often felt cold and impersonal. When the weight of Roman expectations became too heavy, when the demands of duty and honor threatened to crush our spirits, we had a place to go where we could be ourselves completely. The frescoes you now study with such academic interest were painted by artists who understood the sacred nature of their work. Every brushstroke was a prayer. Every color choice a theological statement. The scenes depicted weren't mere decoration but visual scriptures that guided our spiritual journey. As I write these words, knowing that our secret has finally been revealed, I feel both sorrow and relief. Sorrow that the mystery we guarded so carefully has been exposed to the harsh light of scholarly examination. Relief that perhaps, at last, someone might understand what we were truly seeking in those underground chambers. We were not rebels or criminals, though the law saw us as both. We were spiritual seekers, hungry for authentic experience in an age of artificial piety. We found in Dionysus a god who didn't demand perfection but celebrated the full spectrum of human experience. Joy and sorrow, wisdom and folly, restraint and abandon, this is our story, told now for the first time in 2 millennia. Listen carefully. For in understanding our devotion to the god of wine and ecstasy, you might discover something profound about the eternal human longing for transcendence, for connection, for meaning beyond the mundane concerns of daily existence. Chapter 2. The Initiate's Journey. My name was Marcus Aurelius Corvus. Though that identity meant nothing in the sacred hall, I was 23 when I first heard whispers of the hidden cult. Working as a scribe in the Forum Romanum, copying legal documents and commercial contracts. The work was respectable but soul-crushing, each day identical to the last in its tedious precision. The first sign came through Gaius Lucilius, a fellow scribe whose eyes held secrets I couldn't name. He spoke carefully of philosophical gatherings, of discussions about the nature of divine truth that went beyond the official state religion. His words were coded, but something in his manner suggested depths I had never imagined possible in our rigid society. For weeks, I observed him carefully. He seemed to possess an inner peace that eluded most Romans I knew. While others complained about their duties or worried about advancement, Gaius moved through his days with quiet confidence, as if he carried within himself a source of strength invisible to the rest of us. The invitation came on a humid evening in late summer. Gaius approached me as we finished our work, his voice barely above a whisper. "There are others," he said, "who seek truth beyond the marble temples. If you hunger for something real, something that feeds the soul rather than merely the body, meet me tomorrow at the Circus Maximus after the race's end." I spent that night in sleepless contemplation, my rational mind warned of dangers. Association with unauthorized religious activities could mean exile, or worse, but my heart, starved for meaning in a world of empty rituals and hollow ceremonies, urged me forward. I had been raised to worship Jupiter, Mars, and the deified emperors, but their distant majesty had never touched my soul. The next evening found me waiting nervously near the great circus. As the crowds dispersed, Gaius appeared with 2 others. A woman of middle years whose bearing suggested noble birth, and a young man whose calloused hands marked him as a craftsman. We walked in silence through the winding streets, eventually descending into a network of tunnels I had never known existed beneath the city. The journey underground seemed to last hours, though it was probably much shorter. We passed through chambers carved from living rock, some filled with the detritus of forgotten ages, others swept clean and obviously still in use. The air grew cooler and more humid as we descended, carrying scents of earth and stone, and something else, something that made my pulse quicken with anticipation. Finally, we reached a heavy wooden door bound with iron. Gaius knocked in a complex pattern, and after a moment, the door swung open to reveal a chamber that took my breath away. The walls were covered in frescoes of extraordinary beauty and power, scenes of divine revelry, of mortals transformed by ecstatic communion with the gods, of mysteries that spoke to something deep within my soul. Perhaps 20 people were gathered in the chamber, men and women of all ages and social stations. At the center stood a woman of perhaps 40 years, her dark hair crowned with ivy, her eyes holding depths that seemed to reflect eternity itself. This was the priestess, though I would not learn her name for many months to come. She spoke to us newcomers in a voice like honey and wine, explaining that we stood at the threshold of a great mystery. The god Dionysus, she said, offered gifts that the official religion could never provide: genuine transformation, authentic spiritual experience, and liberation from the chains of conventional thinking that bound our souls. But first, we must prove our commitment. The path of initiation was not for the curious or the casual. It demanded everything: our preconceptions, our fears, our very sense of who we thought we were. Those who could not surrender completely to the process would find themselves forever locked out of the deeper mysteries. The first ritual was simple but profound. We were each given a cup of wine mixed with herbs I could not identify. The priestess instructed us to drink while contemplating our deepest desires, not for wealth or power or fame, but for spiritual truth, for connection with the divine, for meaning that transcended the mundane concerns of daily existence. As the liquid coursed through my veins, I felt a loosening of the tight control I had always maintained over my thoughts and emotions. Colors seemed more vivid, sounds more resonant, and the painted figures on the walls appeared to move and breathe with life of their own. This was my first taste of the ecstatic state that would become the center of my spiritual practice. The priestess began to chant in ancient Greek, her voice weaving patterns that seemed to unlock chambers in my mind I had never known existed. Other initiates joined in, their voices blending in harmonies that spoke directly to the soul rather than the intellect. I found myself swaying to rhythms I could feel in my bones, my body moving without conscious direction. When the ceremony ended, I felt fundamentally changed. The world above ground seemed somehow less real, less important than this underground sanctuary where authentic spiritual experience was possible. I knew with absolute certainty that I had found what I had been searching for without even knowing I was searching. The priestess approached me as we prepared to leave. "You have taken the first step," she said, her eyes seeming to look directly into my soul. "But the journey has only begun. Are you prepared to surrender everything you think you know about yourself and the world?" Without hesitation, I nodded. My old life as a mere scribe copying documents had ended. My true life as a devotee of Dionysus had begun. What do you think about these secret rituals? Write in the comments whether you think such cults were necessary for spiritual development in the Roman Empire. Chapter 3: The Priestess of Mysteries. Her name was Claudia Maxima, though she had abandoned her family name when she dedicated her life to serving Dionysus. Born into one of Rome's most distinguished patrician families, she had been expected to marry well and produce heirs to carry on the family legacy. Instead, she chose a path that would have horrified her ancestors. complete devotion to a god the state considered dangerous and subversive. I learned her story gradually, through fragments shared during our long nights of instruction in the hidden chamber. She had been married at 16 to a senator 20 years her senior, a political alliance that brought wealth and status but no happiness. Her husband viewed her as property, valuable for her bloodline and her ability to host elegant dinner parties that advanced his career. The turning point came during a diplomatic mission to Greece, where her husband was negotiating trade agreements with Athens. While he conducted his business, she was left to explore the ancient sites with only a small retinue of servants. It was there, in a grove sacred to Dionysus outside the city walls, that she first experienced the god's presence. She described it as a moment of absolute clarity, when the artificial constraints of Roman society fell away like discarded clothing. Standing among the ancient olive trees, breathing air heavy with the scent of wild herbs, she felt the god's call as clearly as if he had spoken her name aloud. In that instant, she knew her true purpose: not to be a senator's ornamental wife, but to serve as a bridge between the human and divine realms. Returning to Rome, she began to seek out others who shared her spiritual hunger. The official priestesses of Vesta and Ceres seemed content with their ceremonial roles, performing ancient rituals whose meaning had been lost centuries ago. But Claudia craved authentic spiritual experience, the kind of direct communion with divinity that the Greek mysteries promised. Her first contacts were made carefully, through coded conversations at dinner parties and literary gatherings. She discovered a network of Romans who, like herself, felt spiritually starved by the state religion's emphasis on duty and conformity. These were not rebels or revolutionaries, but thoughtful individuals seeking deeper meaning in their lives. The underground chamber had been discovered by accident during construction of a new villa on the Aventine Hill. The workers had broken through into a natural cave system that showed signs of ancient use: carved niches for oil lamps, channels for water, and walls smooth enough to accept painted decoration. Claudia recognized it immediately as a gift from the gods, a ready-made sanctuary for their growing community. She commissioned the frescoes herself, working with artists who understood the sacred nature of their task. Every scene was carefully planned to guide initiates through the stages of spiritual development, ideas, from initial awakening through purification to final union with the divine. The paintings were not mere decoration but visual theology, a complete course in Dionysiac spirituality. Her husband's death in a chariot accident provided the freedom she needed to fully embrace her calling. As a wealthy widow, she could move about the city with relative independence, using her resources to support the growing cult. She purchased the property above the chamber, ensuring their sanctuary would remain secure from discovery. But Claudia was more than just the cult's patron. She was its spiritual heart. She had studied the ancient Greek texts, learning to read the original language of Dionysiac theology. She traveled secretly to sacred sites throughout the Eastern Mediterranean, receiving instruction from priestesses whose lineages stretched back to the god's earliest worshippers. Under her guidance, our rituals became increasingly sophisticated. She taught us the proper preparation of the sacred wine, infused with herbs that opened the mind to divine influence. She instructed us in the dances that had been performed in honor of Dionysus for over 500 years, movements that expressed in physical form the soul's journey toward ecstatic union with the god. Most importantly, She helped each of us understand our personal relationship with Dionysus. The god, she explained, appeared differently to each worshipper, reflecting their individual spiritual needs and capacities. For some, he was the liberator who freed them from social constraints. For others, he was the healer who mended psychological wounds. For still others, he was the teacher who revealed hidden truths about the nature of reality. Claudia possessed an uncanny ability to see into the hearts of those who came seeking initiation. She could identify the genuine seekers from the merely curious, the committed from the casual. Those who approached the mysteries with pure intentions found in her a wise and compassionate guide. Those who came with ulterior motives discovered that their deceptions were transparent to her penetrating gaze. She never spoke of her own ecstatic experiences directly, maintaining the humility appropriate to a true spiritual teacher. But those of us who knew her well could see the profound peace that radiated from her being, the deep joy that seemed to illuminate her from within. She had achieved what we all sought, complete integration of human and divine consciousness. When the authorities finally discovered our sanctuary, Claudia faced the consequences with serene courage. She refused to name other members of the cult or reveal the locations of our other meeting places. Her dignity in the face of persecution became legendary among those who survived the crackdown, inspiring us to maintain our faith even in exile. Years later, I still carry her teachings in my heart. She showed us that true spirituality cannot be contained by political boundaries or social conventions. The God she served so faithfully transcends all human attempts to limit or control divine truth. In honoring her memory, we honor the eternal principle she embodied, that the human soul's hunger for authentic spiritual experience can never be permanently suppressed. Chapter 4. Sacred Rituals and Hidden Meanings. The rituals we performed in that underground sanctuary were far more complex and meaningful than the simple wine-drinking ceremonies our critics imagined. Each element had been carefully preserved from ancient Greek traditions, refined through centuries of practice, to create a complete system of spiritual transformation. To understand our devotion, you must understand the profound theology that guided our actions. The central mystery revolved around the myth of Dionysus himself, his death and resurrection, his journey between the mortal and divine realms, his role as mediator between civilization and the wild forces of nature. We did not simply worship this god. We sought to experience his transformative power directly, to participate in the cosmic drama of death and rebirth that he embodied. Preparation for the major rituals began days in advance. We fasted and purified ourselves, abstaining from meat and sexual relations, spending long hours in meditation and prayer. The priestess would assign us specific texts to study, fragments of Orphic poetry, philosophical treatises on the nature of divine madness, ancient hymns that captured the essence of Dionysiac theology. The sacred wine was prepared according to formulas passed down through generations of initiates. Different herbs were added for different purposes, some to induce visions, others to promote healing, still others to facilitate the ecstatic state necessary for communion with the god. The mixing was done with elaborate ceremony, each ingredient blessed and consecrated before being added to the vintage. Our ceremonies followed the ancient Greek pattern of preparation, invocation, communion, and integration. We would begin by purifying the sacred space, burning incense and sprinkling holy water, while chanting prayers in the god's original language. The walls seemed to absorb our words, the painted figures appearing to nod in approval as we prepared for their divine presence. The invocation phase involved elaborate prayers and offerings designed to attract Dionysus's attention and invite his participation in our ritual. We would pour wine on the earth floor, offer bread and honey, and burn precious resins imported from the eastern provinces. The priestess would recite the god's many names and titles, each one revealing a different aspect of his divine nature. As the sacred wine began to take effect, we would enter the communion phase, the heart of our religious practice. This was not mere intoxication, but a carefully guided journey into altered states of consciousness where direct contact with divinity became possible. The priestess would lead us in chants and dances that had been performed in honor of Dionysus for over 500 years. The dances themselves were a form of prayer in motion, each gesture carrying symbolic meaning. We would begin with slow, meditative movements that helped us leave behind ordinary consciousness. Gradually, the tempo would increase, our bodies becoming instruments through which the god could express his wild, ecstatic nature. In these moments, individual identity dissolved into collective divine experience. During the peak of the ritual, many of us would experience visions, direct communications from Dionysus or other divine beings associated with his cult. These were not hallucinations, but genuine spiritual revelations that provided guidance for our daily lives and deeper understanding of cosmic truths. The priestess taught us to distinguish between authentic divine visions and mere products of an excited imagination. The integration phase was equally important, as we gradually returned to ordinary consciousness, while retaining the insights gained during our ecstatic communion. We would sit in circles, sharing our experiences and helping each other understand the messages we had received. The priestess would interpret particularly significant visions, placing them in the context of Dionysiac theology and mythology. Beyond the major ceremonies, we also practiced daily devotions that kept us connected to our God throughout the ordinary activities of Roman life. These included morning and evening prayers, meditation practices that helped us maintain the inner peace we had discovered in the sanctuary, and ethical guidelines that reflected Dionysiac values of authenticity, compassion, and spiritual freedom. The seasonal festivals were particularly elaborate affairs, timed to coincide with the agricultural cycles that Dionysus governed as a god of vegetation and fertility. During the spring celebrations, we would reenact his resurrection from the underworld, experiencing our own spiritual rebirth through participation in his divine drama. The autumn festivals honored his role as Lord of the Harvest, thanking him for both material and spiritual abundance. Our initiation rituals were carefully structured to guide newcomers through progressive stages of spiritual development. The first level involved purification and basic instruction in Dionysiac theology. The second level introduced the sacred wine and elementary forms of ecstatic practice. Only those who demonstrated genuine commitment and spiritual maturity were admitted to the highest mysteries, where the deepest secrets of the cult were revealed. We also practiced healing rituals, using the god's power to cure both physical ailments and psychological disorders. Dionysus was understood as a physician of the soul, capable of healing the spiritual wounds inflicted by a society that demanded conformity at the expense of authentic self-expression. Many who came to us broken by the pressures of Roman life left transformed and whole. The prophetic aspects of our practice were equally important, Through dreams, visions, and oracular pronouncements received during ecstatic states, we gained insight into future events and divine will. The priestess was particularly gifted in this area, her predictions proving accurate often enough to attract seekers from throughout the city who valued her spiritual counsel. Critics, who dismissed our rituals as mere drunken revelry, completely misunderstood their sophisticated theological foundation. Every element had deep symbolic meaning. Every practice served a specific spiritual purpose. We were not escaping from reality, but discovering a deeper level of reality that the conventional world could not perceive. In honoring Dionysus through these ancient rites, we touched the eternal truths that lie at the heart of all authentic religious experience. Chapter 5. The frescoes speak. The painted walls of our sanctuary were far more than decoration. They were a complete visual theology, a sacred text written in pigment and plaster that guided initiates through the mysteries of Dionysiac spirituality. Each scene had been carefully planned and executed by artists who understood that they were creating not mere artwork, but holy scripture that would inspire and instruct generations of worshippers. The eastern wall depicted the birth and childhood of Dionysus, beginning with his unusual conception when Zeus appeared to Semele in his divine glory. The artist had captured the moment of cosmic union between God and mortal woman, showing how divine power could manifest in the material world through love and desire. This scene taught us that the sacred and profane were not opposites but aspects of a greater unity. Moving clockwise around the chamber, the narrative continued with the god's rescue from his dying mother's womb and his second birth from Zeus's thigh. This miraculous preservation symbolized the soul's ability to survive apparent destruction, to be reborn into higher states of consciousness through divine intervention. We meditated on these images during our purification rituals, drawing strength from Dionysus's triumph over death. The southern wall showed the young god's education by the satyrs and nymphs of Mount Nisa, his discovery of the vine, and his first attempts to share the gift of wine with humanity. These scenes reminded us that spiritual wisdom often came through play and experimentation rather than rigid study, that joy and laughter were as sacred as solemn prayer and meditation. One particularly striking panel depicted Dionysus's encounter with King Pentheus of Thebes, who refused to acknowledge the god's divinity and forbade his worship. The artist had shown the tragic consequences of rejecting authentic spiritual experience: madness, violence, and ultimately, death. This served as a warning to those who might be tempted to abandon their spiritual practice when faced with social pressure or official persecution. The Western Wall was dominated by scenes of the god's journey to the underworld to rescue his mother Semele from death. This myth held special significance for our cult, as it demonstrated Dionysus's power over the ultimate boundary between life and death. We saw in this story a promise that our own spiritual deaths, the ego dissolution necessary for divine union, would be followed by glorious resurrection into new life. Interspersed among the mythological scenes were portraits of famous devotees throughout history, poets, philosophers, and mystics who had found in Dionysiac spirituality the inspiration for their greatest achievements. These figures served as role models, showing us that dedication to our God could coexist with worldly success and cultural contribution. The northern wall featured the most esoteric imagery, symbolic representations of the deepest mysteries that could not be expressed in literal narrative. Here were abstract patterns that seemed to shift and dance in the flickering torchlight, geometric forms that encoded mathematical principles underlying cosmic harmony, and stylized figures that represented archetypal forces operating in both human psychology and divine reality. The ceiling was painted as a night sky filled with constellations associated with Dionysus and his followers. The artist had included not only the familiar Greek star patterns but also astronomical knowledge borrowed from Babylonian and Egyptian sources, creating a cosmic map that placed our earthly rituals in the context of universal spiritual principles. Colors were chosen for their symbolic as well as aesthetic value. Deep purples and rich reds dominated the scenes of divine ecstasy, representing the wine that facilitated communion with the god. Golden yellows highlighted moments of spiritual illumination, while earth tones grounded the more transcendent imagery in natural reality. Silver accents caught the light and seemed to make the painted figures move and breathe. The artists had also incorporated optical illusions that enhanced the fresco's spiritual impact. Certain figures appeared to change expression as you moved around the chamber, their eyes seeming to follow worshippers during ritual processions. Perspective tricks made some scenes appear to extend beyond the physical walls, creating windows into divine realms that existed parallel to our material world. Hidden within the decorative borders were smaller images that revealed themselves only to careful observation. Sacred symbols, mystical formulas, and coded references to advanced teachings reserved for senior initiates. These details rewarded long study and meditation, gradually unveiling deeper layers of meaning to those who approached the frescoes with proper reverence and understanding. During our rituals, the painted walls became active participants in our worship. The torchlight would animate the figures, making them appear to dance along with us. The colors would seem more vivid, the expressions more alive, as if the artists had somehow captured actual divine presences within their pigments. In our ecstatic states, we often felt that we were entering the painted scenes, becoming part of the eternal drama they depicted. The priestess taught us to read the frescoes as a complete curriculum in Dionysiac spirituality. Newcomers would focus on the simpler narrative scenes, learning the basic mythology and theology of our faith. Advanced practitioners studied the more abstract imagery, using it as a focus for meditation and contemplation. The most experienced initiates could perceive connections between different panels that revealed the underlying unity of all spiritual truth. Maintenance of the frescoes was itself a form of worship. We would carefully clean the painted surfaces with soft cloths and pure water, touching up areas where the pigments had faded, and adding new details as our understanding of the mysteries deepened. This work was always done in a spirit of prayer and meditation, treating the walls as living entities that required care and attention. Now that archaeologists have uncovered our sanctuary, they catalog these frescoes as examples of Roman decorative art, analyzing their techniques and dating their creation. But they cannot perceive what we saw in those painted walls, windows into divine reality. Teachers of eternal wisdom, companions in our spiritual journey toward union with the God of wine and ecstasy. The true meaning of our sacred art can only be understood by those who approach it with the eyes of faith and the heart of a seeker. Chapter 6. The Underground Network. Our sanctuary beneath the Aventine Hill was not an isolated phenomenon but part of a vast underground network that stretched throughout the Roman Empire. From the wine caves of Gaul to the mystery temples of Egypt, devotees of Dionysus maintained secret connections that allowed knowledge, resources, and spiritual support to flow between communities of believers scattered across the known world. The network had developed organically over centuries, beginning with Greek colonists who carried their religious traditions to new lands, and evolved into a sophisticated system of communication and mutual aid. Traveling merchants, diplomatic envoys, and military officers who shared our faith served as messengers, carrying coded letters and sacred objects between distant communities. In Rome itself, we discovered at least 12 other active sanctuaries, each serving different neighborhoods and social classes. The one beneath the Palatine Hill catered primarily to wealthy patricians and government officials. Another, hidden in the Subura district, welcomed freedmen and skilled craftsmen. A third, located near the Campus Martius, attracted soldiers and veterans who had encountered Dionysiac mysteries during their service in the eastern provinces. Communication between these groups was maintained through a complex system of signs and passwords. A particular arrangement of wine amphorae in a merchant's shop might signal a meeting time. A specific phrase worked into casual conversation could identify fellow initiates. Graffiti in public latrines, invisible to the uninitiated, conveyed important messages about ritual schedules and security concerns. The priestess Claudia served as a central coordinator for the Roman communities, her wealth and social connections allowing her to travel freely between different sanctuaries. She would carry messages, coordinate festival dates, and ensure that the various groups maintained theological consistency in their practices. Her villa became an informal headquarters where senior initiates from different communities could meet safely. Beyond Rome, our network extended to major cities throughout the empire. Alexandria in Egypt housed one of the oldest and most sophisticated Dionysiac communities. Their practices enriched by contact with ancient Egyptian mystery traditions. Their priests possessed scrolls containing rituals and philosophical texts that dated back to the Ptolemaic period. Treasures of spiritual wisdom that were carefully copied and shared with other communities. Athens maintained its role as the spiritual center of Dionysiac worship, despite centuries of Roman rule. The sacred sites on Mount Parnassus continued to host initiations for pilgrims from across the Mediterranean, while the city's philosophers developed increasingly sophisticated theological interpretations of the gods' mysteries. Many of our Roman practices were refined versions of rituals first developed in Athenian sanctuaries. The island communities of the Aegean Sea served as crucial way stations for travelers and messengers. Rhodes, Delos, and Samos all maintained active Dionysiac temples that operated under the cover of legitimate religious activities. These islands provided safe havens where initiates could rest, resupply, and exchange information without fear of official persecution. In the western provinces, Gallic and Iberian communities had developed their own distinctive variations of Dionysiac practice, blending Greek traditions with local Celtic and Iberian religious customs. These syncretistic approaches often proved more resilient than pure Greek forms, as they could claim legitimacy as indigenous traditions rather than foreign imports. The network also facilitated the movement of people fleeing persecution in their home regions. When authorities cracked down on Dionysiac activities in one city, refugees could find sanctuary and support in distant communities. Safe houses were maintained in major ports and along important trade routes, staffed by initiates who risked their own safety to help fellow believers. Economic cooperation was another important aspect of our underground network. Wealthy initiates in prosperous regions would send financial support to communities facing hardship or persecution. Merchants who shared our faith offered favorable terms to fellow believers, creating informal trade networks that strengthened both our spiritual and material bond. The exchange of sacred objects was particularly significant for maintaining unity across the dispersed communities. Ritual vessels, ceremonial garments, and religious texts would circulate throughout the network, carrying with them the spiritual power accumulated through use in multiple sanctuaries. A cup that had held sacred wine in Athens might later serve the same purpose in Gaul or Britain, creating tangible connections between distant worshippers. Knowledge sharing was perhaps the most valuable function of our network. New insights into Dionysiac theology, innovative ritual techniques, and practical wisdom about avoiding persecution were rapidly disseminated throughout the empire. This collective learning process allowed our tradition to evolve and adapt while maintaining its essential character and spiritual power. The network also served as an early warning system when authorities began investigating Dionysiac activities in particular regions. Messages could travel faster than official communications, allowing threatened communities to take precautions or temporarily suspend their activities until the danger passed. This intelligence network saved countless lives and preserved many sacred sites from discovery. Training of new priests and priestesses was coordinated across the network, ensuring that qualified spiritual leaders were available to guide communities throughout the empire. Promising candidates might travel hundreds of miles to study with renowned teachers, returning home with advanced knowledge and formal authorization to conduct the most sacred rituals. When the final crackdown came, our network proved both a strength and a vulnerability. The connections that had sustained us for centuries also provided authorities with trails to follow from one community to another. Yet, even as the visible structures of our organization were dismantled, the deeper spiritual bonds forged through shared devotion to Dionysus proved impossible to destroy completely. The god's truth lived on in the hearts of scattered believers, waiting for more favorable times to emerge once again into the light. It's amazing how complex this network was. What do you think could such secret organizations have influenced the politics of the Roman Empire? Share your thoughts in the comments. Chapter 7. The persecution begins. The first signs of official interest in our activities came in the form of casual questions from acquaintances who had never shown previous curiosity about religious matters. A fellow scribe would ask about my evening activities with forced casualness. A neighbor would comment on the unusual number of visitors to Claudia's villa. A merchant in the forum would inquire about the meaning of certain symbols he claimed to have seen carved into walls. We had always known this day would come. The Roman state's tolerance for foreign religions extended only as far as those cults remained politically harmless and socially contained. But our growing numbers and the social prominence of some initiates had begun to attract unwanted attention from those who saw any unauthorized religious activity as a potential threat to public order. The catalyst came from an unexpected source. A former initiate named Lucius Cornelius Rufus, who had been expelled from our community for attempting to use his sacred knowledge for personal gain. Bitter at his rejection and facing financial difficulties, he approached the urban praetor with detailed information about our organization, our meeting places, and our membership. Rufus painted our peaceful spiritual gatherings as seditious conspiracies against the state. He claimed that we plotted against the emperor, that our rituals involved human sacrifice and sexual orgies, that our foreign god was undermining traditional Roman values. These lies found eager listeners among officials, already suspicious of any religious activity they could not directly control. The priestess received warning of the impending crackdown through our network of sympathizers in the government. A junior magistrate whose wife was secretly an initiate managed to send word that arrest warrants had been prepared and that raids would begin within days. This gave us precious time to hide our most sacred objects and warn the most vulnerable members of our community. The decision of what to do with our sanctuary was agonizing. Some argued for sealing the chamber completely, hoping it might remain hidden until more tolerant times return. Others wanted to remove all evidence of our activities, leaving nothing for the authorities to discover. Claudia made the final choice. We would preserve everything exactly as it was, trusting that future generations might understand and appreciate what we had created. Working through the night, we carefully sealed the entrance to our underground chamber. The door was walled up with stones and mortar, then covered with earth and planted with shrubs to disguise any signs of disturbance. The frescoes, the ritual vessels, the sacred texts, all were left in place, waiting for archaeologists 2,000 years in the future to uncover our secrets. The raids began at dawn on the Ides of Martius. Squads of vigiles and praetorian guards simultaneously struck known gathering places throughout the city. Most of our sanctuaries were discovered and ransacked, their contents seized as evidence of criminal activity. Dozens of initiates were arrested, including several prominent citizens whose involvement shocked Roman society. Claudia was among the first to be taken. Her wealth and social connections, which had once protected our community, now made her a prime target for official persecution. The authorities wanted to make an example of her, to show that not even the most privileged Romans were above the law when it came to unauthorized religious activities. I managed to evade the initial sweep by pure chance. I had been visiting my sister in Ostia when the raids occurred. Returning to Rome, I found the city buzzing with rumors and accusations. The official version portrayed us as dangerous criminals who had threatened the very foundations of Roman civilization. The truth of our peaceful spiritual practices was lost in a flood of sensationalized propaganda. Those who were captured faced a range of punishments depending on their social status and the degree of their involvement. Common citizens might face exile or forced labor. Slaves could expect crucifixion or death in the arena. But the wealthy and well-connected often negotiated more lenient sentences in exchange for information about other members of the network. The trials were conducted with all the formality of Roman legal procedure, but the outcomes were predetermined. Witnesses testified to activities they had never observed, describing rituals that bore no resemblance to our actual practices. The sacred wine became a poison used to control minds. Our ecstatic dances were transformed into frenzied orgies. Our theological discussions became treasonous plotting against the state. Claudia's trial attracted particular attention because of her prominent family connections and her refusal to cooperate with the prosecution. She maintained her dignity throughout the proceedings, neither denying her faith nor revealing information that might endanger other believers. Her eloquent defense of Dionysiac spirituality was recorded by court scribes. Though these documents were later suppressed, the sentences were harsh but not uniformly fatal. The authorities seemed more interested in destroying our organization than in creating martyrs who might inspire future resistance. Most initiates received exile to distant provinces, effectively breaking up our community and scattering us across the empire. A few, including Claudia, were sentenced to death as ringleaders of the conspiracy. The executions were carried out with typical Roman efficiency, but they failed to achieve their intended effect of terrorizing potential sympathizers. Instead, they created a sense of outrage among those who had known the condemned personally. Stories of their courage and dignity in the face of death spread throughout the city, inspiring rather than discouraging continued devotion to our God. In the aftermath of the persecution, our network adapted and survived. New sanctuaries were established in more remote locations. Rituals were simplified and made more portable, allowing worship to continue even without permanent meeting places. The most sacred knowledge was committed to memory rather than written down, making it harder for authorities to discover and suppress. The persecution taught us valuable lessons about the price of spiritual freedom in an authoritarian society. We learned to be more careful about recruitment, more selective about whom we trusted with our secrets, and more creative about maintaining our practices under hostile conditions. The God we served had survived similar persecutions in the past, and would survive this one as well, emerging stronger and more resilient from the trial of official opposition. Chapter 8. Exile and Survival. My own exile began with a hurried journey through the pre-dawn streets of Rome, carrying only what I could fit in a traveling pack. The network had provided me with new identity documents and enough silver to reach the port of Brundisium, where a ship waited to carry refugees to safer lands. I was no longer Marcus Aurelius Corvus, respected scribe of the Forum Romanum, but Gaius Flavius Maximus, a merchant seeking new opportunities in the eastern provinces. The voyage to Ephesus took 12 days through rough spring seas that kept most passengers confined to their bunks with seasickness. I spent the time in meditation and prayer, trying to process the trauma of losing everything I had known and loved. The physical discomfort seemed insignificant compared to the spiritual anguish of being separated from my community and the sacred spaces where I had found divine communion. Ephesus proved to be a wise destination for a refugee from Roman persecution. The city's cosmopolitan atmosphere and thriving trade connections provided cover for many different religious traditions, including several Dionysiac communities that had operated openly for generations. The local authorities were more concerned with maintaining commercial prosperity than enforcing religious orthodoxy. I was met at the harbor by Demetrios, a silversmith whose workshop served as an informal headquarters for displaced initiates from throughout the empire. His modest building near the Temple of Artemis housed a dozen refugees from the Roman crackdown, all struggling to rebuild their lives while maintaining their spiritual practices in a foreign land. The Ephesian Dionysiac community welcomed us with remarkable generosity, sharing their resources and knowledge despite the additional burden our presence created. They had faced their own persecutions in the past and understood the challenges of maintaining faith under hostile conditions. Their sanctuary, built into natural caves outside the city walls, became our new spiritual home. Adapting to life in exile required more than just learning new customs and languages. We had to reconstruct our entire understanding of what it meant to be devotees of Dionysus when separated from the familiar rituals and sacred spaces that had defined our practice. The God, we discovered, was not confined to any particular location but could be found wherever sincere hearts sought authentic spiritual experience. Our rituals evolved to accommodate our new circumstances. Without access to the specific wines and herbs we had used in Rome, We learned to work with local materials that served the same spiritual purposes. The Ephesian initiates taught us their traditional practices, while we shared innovations we had developed in our Roman sanctuary. This cross-pollination enriched both communities. Communication with other refugee communities became a priority. Letters written in code traveled the trade routes, carrying news of survivors and information about safe havens. We learned that similar groups had formed in Alexandria, Antioch, Pergamon, and dozens of smaller cities throughout the eastern Mediterranean. The persecution had scattered us, but not destroyed us. Economic survival required creativity and mutual support. Some refugees used their Roman connections to establish new trading relationships. Others applied skills learned in their previous lives to local industries. I found work copying Greek manuscripts for the city's libraries, a task that allowed me to study ancient texts related to our religious traditions while earning enough to support myself. The psychological challenges of exile were perhaps more difficult than the material hardships. Many of us struggled with feelings of guilt about those we had left behind, anger at the injustice of our treatment, and uncertainty about whether we would ever be able to return home. The community provided crucial emotional support, helping us process these feelings through shared ritual and mutual counseling. News from Rome arrived sporadically and was often contradictory. Some reports suggested that the persecution was intensifying, with new arrests and executions occurring regularly. Others hinted that public opinion was turning against the harsh measures, particularly after the death of Claudia and other respected citizens. We learned to be skeptical of all information, knowing that both hope and despair could be used as weapons against us. The Ephesian sanctuary became a center for preserving and transmitting the knowledge that might otherwise have been lost in the Roman crackdown. Senior initiates worked to record the rituals, prayers, and theological insights that had previously been maintained only through oral tradition. These texts were carefully copied and distributed to other refugee communities, ensuring that our spiritual heritage would survive. New initiates continued to seek us out, drawn by the reputation of our community and the authenticity of our spiritual practices. Some were refugees from other persecuted religions who found in Dionysiac spirituality a path that honored their need for genuine religious experience. Others were local residents who had become disillusioned with conventional forms of worship. The seasonal festivals took on special significance for our exile community. These celebrations connected us to the eternal cycles of nature that transcended political boundaries, and reminded us that our God's power was not diminished by human persecution. The spring festivals became particularly meaningful, symbolizing our own spiritual resurrection from the death of our former lives. Over time, we developed new traditions that reflected our unique circumstances as a community in exile. Memorial services honored those who had died in the persecution, while Thanksgiving rituals celebrated the generosity of those who had helped us survive. These innovations were shared with other refugee communities, gradually becoming part of the broader Dionysiac tradition. The experience of exile also deepened our understanding of Dionysus himself as a god who had wandered the earth, seeking acceptance for his divine message. Like us, he had faced rejection and persecution from those who feared the transformative power of authentic spiritual experience. Our sufferings connected us more intimately to his own journey from rejection to ultimate triumph. Years passed before we received reliable word that the persecution in Rome had ended, and that limited religious tolerance had been restored. By then, Many of us had put down roots in our new homes and chose to remain in the eastern provinces. The exile that had begun as a tragedy had become an opportunity for growth, spreading our spiritual tradition to new lands and enriching it through contact with different cultures and religious practices. Chapter 9. The Legacy Preserved. 20 years have passed since the great persecution scattered our Roman community to the winds. I write these words in a scriptorium overlooking the harbor of Ephesus, where ships arrive daily carrying news from across the Mediterranean world. The Roman Empire has changed dramatically in these decades, becoming more tolerant of religious diversity, while paradoxically more rigid in its political control. The Dionysiac communities that survived the crackdown have evolved into something both familiar and new. We maintain the essential elements of our spiritual practice: the sacred wine, the ecstatic rituals, the profound theology of death and resurrection, but exile forced us to adapt these traditions to new circumstances, creating innovations that have enriched our understanding of the God's mysteries. The network that once connected secret sanctuaries throughout the empire has been rebuilt as a more open association of philosophical schools and religious communities. We no longer hide in underground chambers but meet in rented halls and private gardens, protected by legal precedents that recognize our right to worship according to our conscience rather than state dictate. New generations of initiates have joined our communities, many of them born in exile, who know our traditions only through the stories and practices we have preserved. They bring fresh perspectives to ancient wisdom, asking questions that challenge us to articulate more clearly what we believe and why these beliefs matter in a changing world. The theological developments that emerged from our exile experience have been profound. Separation from our familiar sacred spaces forced us to discover that Dionysus could be found anywhere. Sincere hearts sought authentic spiritual experience. This insight has made our tradition more portable and resilient, less dependent on specific locations or material objects. We have also developed a deeper appreciation for the God's role as protector of the persecuted and champion of spiritual freedom. The suffering we endured connected us more intimately to his own mythological journey from rejection to acceptance, from death to resurrection. Our personal experiences of loss and renewal became part of the larger cosmic drama he embodies. The preservation of our knowledge has become a sacred duty that occupies much of my time in these later years. Working with other survivors, I have compiled comprehensive records of our Roman practices, ensuring that future generations will understand what was lost when the authorities destroyed our original sanctuaries. These texts are copied and distributed throughout our network. The frescoes that once adorned our hidden chamber beneath the Aventine Hill live on in detailed descriptions and careful sketches made from memory by those who knew them well. While we cannot reproduce their exact beauty, we can preserve their symbolic meaning and theological significance for initiates who will never see the originals. Contact with other mystery religions during our exile has led to fruitful exchanges of ideas and practices. The followers of Isis, Mithras, and the Great Mother have faced similar challenges from suspicious authorities, and we have learned much from their strategies for survival and adaptation. These interactions have broadened our understanding of the universal human need for authentic spiritual experience. The philosophical schools of Athens and Alexandria have shown renewed interest in Dionysiac theology, recognizing its sophisticated approach to questions of consciousness, identity, and transcendence. Academic study of our traditions has helped legitimize them in the eyes of educated Romans, who might otherwise dismiss them as mere superstition or foreign corruption. Young Romans traveling in the eastern provinces often seek us out, hungry for the spiritual authenticity they cannot find in the official state religion. Many are sons and daughters of the very officials who once persecuted us, drawn by the same spiritual needs that motivated their parents' generation. This irony is not lost on those of us who remember the terror of the crackdown. The seasonal festivals have become major celebrations that attract participants from throughout the region. The Spring Resurrection Festival, in particular, draws hundreds of worshippers to our sanctuary outside Ephesus. These gatherings serve multiple purposes: spiritual renewal, community building, and demonstration that our tradition has not only survived but thrived despite persecution. We have established schools for training new priests and priestesses, ensuring that qualified spiritual leaders will be available to guide communities throughout the Mediterranean world. The curriculum includes not only traditional ritual knowledge, but also practical skills for maintaining communities under adverse conditions and adapting practices to local circumstances. The healing aspects of our tradition have gained particular recognition as physicians and philosophers study the therapeutic effects of our rituals on both physical and psychological ailments. The integration of wine, music, dance, and community support creates a holistic approach to wellness that complements conventional medical treatments. Artistic expression continues to play a crucial role in preserving and transmitting our spiritual insights. New frescoes, mosaics, and sculptures created by initiated artists carry forward the visual theology that was so important in our Roman sanctuary. These works are more subtle than their predecessors, designed to inspire rather than instruct, beautiful to all viewers, but meaningful only to those who understand their symbolic language. The prophecies and oracular pronouncements that emerge from our ecstatic rituals have gained respect even among skeptics, as their accuracy in predicting political and economic developments has been repeatedly demonstrated. This reputation has provided a degree of protection, as even hostile officials are reluctant to persecute those whose spiritual insights might prove valuable to the state. As I prepare to pass leadership of our community to younger hands, I am filled with gratitude for the privilege of witnessing Dionysus's triumph over persecution and exile. The god who was once dismissed as a threat to Roman civilization has proven to be one of its most enduring spiritual treasures. The sanctuary you have discovered beneath the Aventine Hill was just one chapter in a story that continues to unfold across the ancient world, a testament to the eternal human hunger for authentic connection with the divine. Chapter 10. The Eternal Dance. Now, as archaeologists carefully brush away 2 millennia of dust from our sacred frescoes, I wonder what they make of the scenes they uncover. Do they see mere historical curiosities, examples of Roman decorative art to be catalogued and displayed in museums? Or do they sense something of the spiritual power that once animated those painted walls, the divine presence that transformed ordinary mortals into ecstatic participants in cosmic mysteries? The chamber you have opened was sealed with such care because we knew that someday, in a more enlightened age, people would seek to understand what we had discovered in our communion with Dionysus. We left everything in place: the ritual vessels, the sacred texts, the magnificent frescoes, as a message to the future, a testament to the eternal human need for authentic spiritual experience. The God we served transcends the boundaries of time and culture. Dionysus is not merely an ancient deity whose worship died out with the fall of paganism. but an eternal principle that manifests wherever human beings seek to break free from the constraints of conventional thinking and experience the divine directly. The forms of worship may change, but the underlying spiritual hunger remains constant. In your modern world, I suspect that many people feel the same spiritual emptiness that drove us to seek the hidden god of wine and ecstasy. The official religions of your time, like those of ours, may offer comfort and community, but fail to provide the transformative experiences that the soul truly craves. The same forces that made Dionysiac worship attractive to ancient Romans continue to operate in human nature. The persecution we faced was not unique to our historical moment but represents a recurring pattern in human civilization. Whenever authentic spiritual movements challenge established religious or political authorities, they face suppression from those who fear losing control over the hearts and minds of the people. Yet these movements always resurface, often in new forms that reflect the needs and circumstances of their time. The techniques we developed for preserving spiritual knowledge under hostile conditions may prove relevant to your own era. The careful encoding of sacred wisdom in artistic symbols, the creation of networks that can survive official persecution, the adaptation of ancient practices to new circumstances. These strategies have been used by spiritual communities throughout history. The frescoes on our sanctuary walls tell a story that extends far beyond the specific mythology of Dionysus. They depict the universal journey of the soul from ignorance to enlightenment, from separation to union, from death to resurrection. These themes appear in every authentic spiritual tradition, expressed through different symbols and narratives but pointing toward the same fundamental truths about human potential. The community we created in that underground chamber represented an ideal that continues to inspire seekers in every age. A gathering of equals, united not by social status or political affiliation but by shared commitment to spiritual growth and mutual support. In our rituals, the barriers that divided Roman society dissolved, revealing the fundamental unity that underlies all apparent differences. The sacred wine that facilitated our communion with the divine was not merely an intoxicant, but a sacrament that opened doorways of perception usually closed to ordinary consciousness. Modern research into altered states of consciousness has validated many of our ancient insights about the relationship between these experiences and spiritual development, psychological healing, and creative inspiration. The dances we performed in honor of Dionysus were forms of moving meditation that integrated body, mind, and spirit in harmonious expression of divine energy. These practices recognized that authentic spirituality must engage the whole human being, not just the intellect or emotions, and that physical movement can be a powerful catalyst for transcendent experience. The seasonal celebrations that marked our ritual calendar connected us to the natural cycles that govern all life on earth. In honoring the gods' death and resurrection, we participated in the eternal drama of renewal that manifests in the changing seasons, the cycles of agricultural fertility, and the rhythms of human psychological and spiritual development. The healing work that emerged from our practices recognized the interconnection between physical health, emotional well-being, and spiritual fulfillment. We understood that true healing must address the whole person, not just isolated symptoms, and that community support and meaningful ritual can be as important as medical treatment in restoring wholeness. The prophetic insights that arose from our ecstatic states demonstrated the expanded awareness that becomes possible when ordinary consciousness is transcended. These experiences revealed patterns and connections invisible to rational analysis alone, providing guidance that proved valuable not only for individual lives, but for understanding broader social and political developments. The artistic expressions that adorned our sanctuary reflected our understanding that beauty and truth are intimately connected. That aesthetic experience can be a pathway to spiritual realization. The frescoes, sculptures, and ritual objects we created were not mere decorations but vehicles for transmitting sacred knowledge and inspiring transformative experiences. The network of communities that sustained our tradition across the ancient world demonstrated the power of shared vision to transcend geographical and cultural boundaries. Despite the diversity of local practices and interpretations, we maintained unity through commitment to core principles and mutual support in times of crisis. As you study the artifacts we left behind, remember that they are not merely objects to be analyzed and catalogued, but sacred vessels that once contained living spiritual experiences. The true treasure hidden in our sanctuary was not gold or precious stones, but the wisdom we gained through direct communion with divine consciousness. Insights that remain as relevant today as they were 2,000 years ago. The dance continues, though the dancers have changed. Somewhere in your modern world, people are gathering to seek authentic spiritual experience, to break free from the constraints of conventional thinking, to discover the divine spark that burns within every human heart. They may not call themselves followers of Dionysus, but they serve the same eternal principle that we honored in our hidden chamber beneath the Aventine Hill. The god of wine and ecstasy lives on, waiting to transform any sincere seeker who approaches his mysteries with an open heart and a willingness to surrender everything they think they know about themselves and the world. This is our legacy, our gift to the future. The knowledge that authentic spiritual experience is always possible for those brave enough to seek it, regardless of the opposition they may face from those who prefer the safety of conventional beliefs to the dangerous freedom of direct divine encounter. Thank you for reading this fascinating story to the end. What impressed you most about the story of Dionysus's secret rituals? Be sure to write your impressions in the comments and subscribe to the channel for new historical discoveries.